Sheet live dashboard. Green, connecting your content, streaming health. Looks good. It's starting. Right. Okay, and full size. Okay, so for the first part of the day, I was going to give a lecture, and then we're going to discuss the stuff I put up in the on Blackboard for you guys to do. Some of you watched the YouTube video of propaganda, and did you do your player motivations, like why you play games? You did some, and we can discuss whether or not you felt that there was a kind of very simple. If I ask you, are you an explorer, and you tick yes, I'm an explorer, I reveal to you, you're an explorer. Some of the questions felt a bit like they were just testing, like asking you, are you this category? And you'd say, yes, I am that category. So it didn't feel kind of a subtle way of asking you questions. Some of them felt very kind of obvious. So, serious games. So last week we talked about serious games. And I thought I'd go through some of the specifics of the things that I want you to think about while you're reading and reviewing papers through the semester, and also have an overview of the fields, right? So we talked a little bit about them last week, and the kind of motivation. But here is kind of more of a presentation style that we can talk about now that we think we've got most of the students actually here. So, gamification. Hopefully you've all heard the term gamification, because it was in the course description, so you read the course and, oh yeah, that must be an English word. Yeah, it kind of is an English word. It is a relatively new construction, the word gamification. So it's a bit like, you've heard of beautification or gentrification, gasification. Yeah. Gasification sometimes pops up when you try and write in gamification, in your spell checker, turns it into gasification. So one year I had a presentation down in Agda on gasification, because when they put it out, it auto-corrected. So gasification is when you turn something into a gas. Gasification of almost anything humans do is probably a bad idea. So this was basically add-inification to stuff, is where you try and turn something into something. So gamification. Now, one of the early definitions of gamification I quite strongly disagree with, and it's one you'll find used in the literature quite a bit. And I've had the debate with Datarding and with Mac, who were part of the authors on that paper, and they define gamification as applying games to non-game activities. Right? So gamification, you say, like, game approaches to things and game mechanics, and you attach them to, you know, workouts or school or health or propaganda or whatever, right? You are applying game stuff to non-game stuff. I don't like that, because for me, you can gamify a game, right? And their argument is, well, no, you're not. If it's already a game, you can't gamify it because it's already a game, right? So you can't beautify something that's already beautiful, right? Because that wouldn't make sense. But for me, the Olympics are a gamification of sport. And the Olympic Games are a gamification of games, because they're Olympic Games, and I'm adding another layer of game activity on top of something that's already a game. All right? So I think, for me, the definition needs to be applying game mechanics to an existing activity is a gamification. All right? So whether that existing activity is a game or not, that's irrelevant to whether you're applying a game mechanic to it.
You would say that esports is a gamification of an existing game?
Yes, I would say esports is the gamification of an existing game, right? It's not that you've redesigned a whole new game from scratch, right? Because if you design a game from scratch, that is the activity you want. Then it's a game, it's not a gamification of something that exists, right? Whereas if you take a game currently, it's like StarCraft, right? If you take StarCraft and then make an esports league around the game StarCraft without actually changing StarCraft, you have gamified that game. right? By adding additional other game mechanics and other ways of scoring, like another whole point system and another ranking system, and yeah, a whole new activity on top of it. Now, one of the things you'll find when you read papers is you have to understand what definition of gamification you're using, because that will determine how they interpret what they're doing. Right? So just because I have this definition doesn't mean that's the accepted definition. Right? And some of these terms are still in flux. At the moment, the word gamification is being phased out by a lot of people, because just like any term that gets used, if it's a jargon term and you get a whole bunch of businesses come in and start offering that jargon term, people in the industry stop using it because a bunch of lawyers and accountants are using it, right? And so gamification has become something that consultants say when they want to sell their standard business loyalty program to people, right? And so it kind of, it's been getting a bad reputation, which means some of the academics stop using it. So eventually, maybe the commercial people will stop using it because it's no longer fashionable, and then we might get to use it again, right? So it has to kind of go through these cycles. You actually found this with a whole bunch of insults in English. You'll find that they migrate. When I was reading a book on education, and it was talking about IQ tests and working out the number that your IQ score was, and it was trying to work out whether, and it said, you know, these scores can tell you whether your child is a moron, a Mongol, or merely defective. It's kind of okay. So moron and Mongol have both been used as insults since then. They were being used as technical terms at that point, right? But you know, once they got used as insult, we know, oh, you can't call someone a moron. They're merely retarded, and then because retarded was a technical term for not being as fast, right? So technically, to retard something is to slow it down. So if you're slightly slowed, you're retarded. And that's an okay term in that context, in that decade. And then when people use it as an insult, we go, oh, you can't use the retarded, you call them handicapped. And then, you know, handicapped gets used to insult people. Oh, we can't use handicapped. We now have to use, like, you know, differently abled. And it's called, well, you can't call them different. So now you have to have, because that's ableism. And so we keep changing the word, because when a word gets used to be insulting, you then have to move away from it, right? And so you kind of had this constant, a word gets used for something, a bunch of people use it for a negative way, and then you have to move on, right? So gamification is in that phase, right? It's in the retarded phase of being, you know, it's being used by people in a way that we don't want, and it sounds bad. So be a wee bit careful when you use gamification. Sometimes you'll see, I've seen playification being used, which is, I think, a really bad way of kind of creating a word. Playful design, you'll start seeing some people call that. Engaging design. When I first started teaching games, we weren't allowed to use the word game in university because that was for kids, and so you had a whole bunch of engaging interactive media courses, right, to try and avoid the word game, because, you know, games were not something that was serious enough for universities. So yeah, if we use the definition of gamification a bit like this, then we can have a look now. Both Foursquare and Goala are dead because these things have gone away, but this is some this is where some of the kind of gamification started early in on the internet with Foursquare and Goala, where the thing you were gamifying was the act of existing. Right, so you'd give points for people who were checking in. Right, so Facebook Places did this. At one stage, they were trying to give you status points for saying where you were. Right, and so this whole idea of existing, and we give you points for existing in places, because then, you know, You go to a shop and you say, hey, I'm in a shop. And you're now seeing Google is probably telling you when you go to a restaurant or you go to a shop, sometimes you'll get this wee pop-up that says, oh, can you review that shop for us? Have any of you? Yeah. Okay, I've been...
They don't say that, we need your help.
We need your help.
It's an epic quest.
Yes, we need your help. It's a quest. So they're trying to phase it in. You're helping us to make things like the world a better place, right? When they first started doing, they tried to earn points and get badges for doing the same kind of thing. A Koha was an interesting one and very defunct now, but a group, I met a couple of developers in the US, and what they were trying to do is he was sitting developing the blood splatter for a game, right? So he spent 6 months getting the blood splatter right for his AAA game that he was working on, and he felt that he wasn't adding to society, right? That this using all my brain power to try and make the blood look really realistic as it splays up across the wall and across other players wasn't really what he wanted to do with his life. And so he founded a company to try and gamify being nice to each other. Right? So doing good deeds earn you karma points. And so you had this whole online system where, and a deck of cards, and you'd hand the cards to people. So there was a card of give someone a book. So what you're supposed to do is the card had a unique ID in it. You'd put the card in the book, give it to a random person, and then they would scan the card and you would get points for having given them the book. And then they were supposed to take the card, hand that in a new book to some other person, and then when that person scanned, you would get points, and the person you first gave the book to would also get points, like a pyramid scheme of, as your good karma of giving things to people spreads, you get more and more points by playing a pyramid scheme of being nice to one another.
What about apartment? What about apartments?
Apartment?
Yeah. Give to another person your apartment. Be nice.
Oh, you give up your apartment so someone else can live in it. You could be very nice. And the problem for them was, how do you make money out of being nice to people? They didn't have a business model around how they were going to get people to pay to be nice to other people.
You could make a loot box system out of it, so that you got a random number of points when you're doing, so you can do a skinner box approach.
You could try and do a skinner box approach, yeah. But then how do you make money, right? So you need to buy the loot boxes, for example, right? So, and you get random amounts of karma points. Yay, I've got the most money. So yes, pay to win karma. That's that kind of the thing.
That's just philanthropy.
So I was reading an interesting discussion around D&D and earning experience from having gold, right? So when I started playing D&D, because I started first edition because I had the red book, level 3 maximum level, you got experience points by getting gold coins, right? So the treasure you got gave you the experience points. But which made your motivation quite different, because instead of having to kill monsters to get experience points, you would try and avoid killing things, avoid the monsters, and just steal all their stuff, which made it quite a different game. And the philanthropy, you could give experience points for giving away money. So if you use it, you don't get experience points, but if you give it away, you get experience points. So how you motivate people, how you give an indication to people that they're doing the right thing in your game, is all part of the design of your game. So, I've said this on my third year, so I'm sure several times. I see education itself as a game, right? We are at university, you guys are at NTNU. NTNU is higher status than Yervik was, so we upgraded, yay, we leveled up from being a university college to being a university, and so all of the people studying with us leveled up to being a university. Maybe. And you can look at, different aspects of the way that we've organized this to have been a gamification of a core activity of learning, right? You guys are all supposed to love learning, but society wants you to learn specific things. So we have gamified it so you learn the specific things we want you to learn. Right? And to do that, we've given you badges and grades and rules of when you have to turn up and what happens if you don't turn up and things like that, right? It's no longer just been left up to you. We're not just waiting to see what you learn. We're saying, no, you will learn these things in this way. I've looked at various ways that we could give experience points in courses and try and grade using an experience points kind of approach to grading, and try and make games out of things. So the Kahoots, which will, if you haven't had a Kahoot, we'll do a Kahoot later. Kahoots are our way of trying to make a game show out of the lecture experience. Given that you're already in a game, like the whole gamifying education is gamifying what I already consider a game, and so perhaps we should just improve the game that we're in rather than adding more mechanics on top of an already existing and potentially broken game. Right? So we can have a long discussion of whether you think education's a game or not. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about initial game mechanics. So these are things that you'll start to notice in games, and you'll notice that these are some of the things that games do particularly well. So the first one I talk about, and I talk in undergraduate a lot about, is balance. Right? Unlike a lot of other activities, games try and provide a balanced system. Now, this is rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. If you've not seen lizard, Spock, lizard. And rock, paper, scissors is overbalanced, right? It's too even, the choice, right? So, and it's supposed to be kind of perfectly symmetric. But perfectly symmetric means that there's not much to think about when you make decisions in that game, right? So if you're creating a serious game and you want to motivate people to do a particular activity, if you create an extremely balanced activity where every choice they make has the same outcome, then you're not guiding them in any particular direction, right? It's all kind of, it's all equivalent, right? But if you make interesting side effects, or you have interesting characteristics around the choice, and you start making the choice have different effects that are potentially hard to calculate or incalculable, like, do you want an orange or an apple? Well, sometimes I want an orange and sometimes I want an apple because I have different desires, right? But if you offered me 10 krona or 10 krona, that's still 10 krona. Neither of those matter, right? So when they're easily equatable, it loses some of the kind of value of making an interesting choice. If it, however, is completely unbalanced, so instead of offering you an apple or an orange, or 10 krona and 10 krona, I offer you 1,000 krona or 100 krona, which would you prefer? Who prefers the 100 krona? Okay, right. I think that's a pretty clear message. You all want the larger financial amount because it's just bigger, right? There's nothing else attached to it. And that's an unbalanced system that creates a dominant strategy, right? And this is one of the big problems for serious games, is a lot of health people want to create their game so that doing what the doctor tells you to is clearly and obviously the right thing to do all the time, right? And then the game becomes very boring because it's no longer a game where you're making interesting choices and there's balanced decisions to make. It's you're doing what you're told and ignoring the bad choices, right? Because there's just a whole bunch of obviously bad choices. And if you do so we have a fire quiz. I don't know if they make you do the fire quiz. Right, you might have done a fire quiz, and it has questions like, if you see a fire, what should you do? Walk towards the fire. Walk away from the fire. It's kind of like, yes. Ring the alarm and walk away from the fire. Yeah. Do nothing. If there's some obviously right answer, it's just, you're not giving them real choice. Right? You're giving them a fake choice.
You mean like the Are You a Terrorist on going to the States?
Yes! Now, though that's an interesting... Do you know the reason I actually ask you that question?
Just double check.
Nope. They don't expect anybody to actually answer, yes, I am a terrorist.
No.
Right? It's because when they catch you doing something they don't like, they don't have to convict you for that thing and then try and deport you. They can just say, we've detected you incorrectly filled in your immigration form, and we can deport you because of that. Right? So yeah, because if you say, I have no affiliations with ISIS, right? They don't have to convict you of anything. They can just say, we believe you have affiliations with ISIS, therefore you filled in your form wrong, and we can deport you because you incorrectly filled in your immigration form.
But they have to prove that you have connections?
No. They just have to say you have connections, you incorrectly filled in your form.
That makes you just say that about benefits.
No. Well, it gives them an easy way of doing that.
Yeah.
Right? It's an easy way of getting rid of you because you did the form incorrectly. Right?
Then you could just sort of say, like, on the form, you could just write, did you fill in the form correctly? And then if you answer yes, and we believe that you didn't because you answered yes in this question.
Yeah, so there are some interesting mechanics that come into play there. So, currency, games usually give you a way of earning and spending something in the game, right? This could be actual, like, currency in the game, or it could be experience points in the game, or it could be a resource that you have that you then have to allocate to different technology trees and those sort of things. This appeals to a bunch of people who are trying to kind of collect, and it's a sign that you're doing well. If you have lots of currency, you think, oh, I'm doing really well, right? So have all of you played the paperclip game? No, okay. That'll probably suck up about a day of your time. So don't start playing it until you're willing to lose a day on a clicker game. It's the paperclip game where you just make paperclips, and it's about artificial intelligence, right? It's about a super intelligent machine turning us all into paperclips because it thinks that that's what the right thing to do is. And you are that machine turning the universe into paperclips, which is kind of weird. But the paperclip game, when you find it, you'll find that it's strange. But this idea of earning something and then spending something to improve yourself in the game is quite common in games. Points, and this is where I will talk about gender issues, because in games we do talk about gender issues. I would like to make the note that when I talk about gender issues, I'm generally talking kind of on averages. So whenever I say, women tend to be more like this or men tend to be more like this, I mean, 70% of men, which means it might be none of you in this room, or it could be all of you in this room, right? So there's an equal chance. But generally, men are more easily manipulated than women by giving them points. Just we're susceptible to it more often than women. Though again, 30% of women are susceptible to points, so it's a general trait kind of activity. Points are a good way of indicating to your player what you as a designer think is a good thing to do. Right? So when we give you grades, what we do is we say, here's a marking scheme, there's 20% here, there's 50% here, there's 20% there. We're trying to say, do some work here, do most of your work in the middle, do some work down here, and we'll give you points if you do it the way we wanted you to do it. Right? This is me trying to control what you learn by giving you points for learning the things that I think you should learn. And you do the same in games, right? If killing monsters earns you points, and someone wants more points, they go and kill more monsters. Right? So it's a pretty cheap trick of trying to get people to do what you want them to do. Loot boxes. There's actually an interesting current discussion ethically around loot boxes. I think the EU is considering having all games that have loot boxes having to explicitly state the chances of getting everything in the loot boxes.
I don't think the drop rates.
Drop rates, yes. So you had to specify and not name your drop rates in your loot drop boxes. Now this partly comes from the Skinner box reinforcement mechanisms that games got quite good at, and a lot of game companies are very good at kind of tweaking their systems until they get this perfect. So if you don't recognize this is a rat in a standard Skinner box where we have an electrified grid on the bottom where you can shock them, and food pellets coming out here. So you're trying to reward them and punish them. Right? So in for humans, we tend not to punish them because people don't like being punished so much, but we do look at reward structures. And from learning from Skinner boxes, we know there are some simple things you can do to manipulate human beings, right? And manipulate pretty much all mammals in the way that you give rewards, right? So an unknown amount of reward triggers your dopamine system around expectation, and it kind of thinks, I anticipate something, and if it's okay, it goes, okay, it was only okay this time. But if it gets a good one, it goes, woohoo, good one! And it then triggers that dopamine cycle to want to do that again, right? On the off chance that you might get something good. And in fact, if you want to bed a behavior in, having if you have a standard reward, it doesn't habituate. Whereas if you have varying reward, it habituates much better into humans and animals, right? So if every time you do something, I gave you 100 kroner, right? Every time you do it, I give you 100 kroner, give you 100 kroner, give you 100 kroner. You keep doing it every day, and then at some point, if I stop giving you the 100 kroner, you'll just stop doing what I was asking you to do, right? Because I had reward, the reward stopped, the behavior then stops, because I'm no longer paying you to do it. If, however, say you were coming and shoveling my snow, right? If I paid you 100 kroner every time you came and shoveled my snow, and then one time I didn't pay you, you probably wouldn't come the next time because I didn't pay you for the last time. However, if you came, some days I'll give you 100 kroner, and one day I give you 1,000 kroner, and then one day I don't pay you. You think, well, maybe if I go back the next day, I might get that 1,000 kroner again. So give you 10 kroner, and then I give you 500 kroner, and then 10 kroner, then 20 kroner, and 80 kroner, and then 10 kroner, then 100 kroner, and then 10 kroner. I can probably end up giving you less money overall, because occasionally I give you a big amount of money. Right? That would be doing a loot box kind of drop for digging my snow for me. And actually, if I stopped paying you entirely, you would come and dig my snow for longer, on the off chance that I might happen to give you a big drop in the future because I've been so random, right? So it's not completely predictable. Humans will kind of, and animals will go back to it. You guys are also really bad at random, because we're all mammals. We're really bad at understanding random numbers. You guys are terrible at predicting random reward systems. So you try and second guess things. You have a normative approach to random numbers. So if I say to you that something is a 50-50 chance, heads and tails, and you get 5 heads in a row, a lot of you will use the gambler's paradox and bet on tails, because you know it should average out. So a tail has to be coming up, so they've had so many heads. But that's not how independent randomness works, right? It's just independent randomness, 50% from now on. It's just the way it is. So our brains aren't designed around understanding randomness. They're not good at figuring out reward structures and understanding the underlying principles. And so a lot of games manipulate our cognitive foibles, the things that we do badly, to try and keep people playing games. And as I said, we also give status. Status motivates people as well. It's another mechanic you can do. Often in games you'll find that they're like, so in a lot of serious games, they will add some kind of status information. You'll move up as you play the game longer to try and engage people. We don't need to play the video. I'll keep moving. So the point is that I consider all of those mechanics tools. Right? They're ways of achieving things. They're like how you do stuff, but they're not really why you're doing it. They're just a tool that you use, right? You try and balance options, you have reward structures, you have currency, you do these things because they're kind of things you can do, but they don't actually determine whether or not you've got a good game or a bad game. They kind of state that it's a game. Now this is one of the things you'll find really tricky in a lot of the definitions and a lot of the ways people talk about games. Is they don't make a distinction between what they define as a game and what they define as a good game versus the bad game. Right? And the big thing here, one of the big things is it fun? Right? So some people want to say that all games are fun. Problem is, if you say all games are fun, then how do you have a good game or a bad game? How do you have a bad game? Because As soon as it's a bad game, it's not fun, and therefore by definition not a game anymore. Right? So it falls into that kind of no true Scotsman fallacy. You know the no true Scotsman fallacy? Is that so? I see one nod. Do you all know the no true Scotsman fallacy? Okay, well I have to explain the no true. You should understand some of your logical fallacies, because we'll refer to them. The no true Scotsman fallacy is the idea that is the statement, you know, all true Scotsmen wear kilts. Okay, so all true Scotsmen wear kilts. And then you say, ah, look, Robbie Burns, he didn't wear a kilt. And they say, ah, he's not a true Scotsman. So what I do is, anytime you bring up a counterexample, I just say, well, that proves they're not one of the things I was talking about. Right? So all good students study from day one. And you say, yeah, but this person got an A, and they didn't study from day one. I say, well, they're not a good student, they got lucky. So my premise that all good students study from day one, even if you give me counterexamples of massively successful people, or people who are getting high grades, I go, no, they're not really good students. They're not properly good students. They're lucky students, or, you know, they'll turn out badly in the end students or something, right? So it's the no true Scotsman is the I will take the definition and make it fit by excluding everybody that doesn't fit my definition. And you have that problem with games, is people make, if they say, you know, a good game is like this, and you say, well, here's a good game, and it's not like that. Well, that's not a good game. Like you're using your definition to define to create the category. So lots of those tools fall into what you'll find discussed as well in the literature is points, badges, and leaderboards, right? And so there is some literature out there on going beyond points, badges, and leaderboards, because we recognize that they fit into the Skinner box approach of I can give you points to drive you in a direction, I give you badges to say when you're doing it right, and I give you a leaderboard so you can compare yourself to other people so you can keep doing more of what I want you to do. Right? And I can shame people and say, look, you're not doing well enough because on the leaderboard you're down here, so you need to do more of what I tell you to do so you can get more points so you can be better. Right? And shame on you for not being higher on the leaderboard. Right? So there are the kind of relatively surface level engagement mechanics that people use in games. Right? You'll see standardly a lot of the research you do this semester, you'll find points, badges, and leaderboards as what they call making a game out of an activity. Right? It's just, you know, we do this thing, we add some points, it's now a game. I consider this the wrong focus. Right? They are looking at the wrong thing as to why they're using serious games. They're not using games because games are the only thing that gives you points or status, right? There are loyalty schemes that give you, you know, flybys or flying points, right? If you're with SAS, you get membership points and stuff, right? It's not a game, it's just reward points because they're points, right? If I focused on quick lunch and said I sell Brussels sprouts, so I would wrap my Brussels sprouts around a check centre and put them in a shiny packet, I'm sure all of you will buy quick sprout. I'm sure you'll buy quick sprout because, you know, it's in the right wrapper, it's got the check centre, it's got the right things that you can break and eat. Yes? Or
Probably try.
you might.
Because, you know, it's so weird.
You might try it because and so I created this, and I created a green image of green Kit Kats, and then someone pointed out that there are green Kit Kats. They're green tea Kit Kats in South Korea, and actually later someone who went to one of my talks sent me a packet of green tea Kit Kats. They taste a bit odd, but yeah. But that idea of focusing on just, well, the games have these things about them, so we just apply those to something else, and that makes it a game. You'll be able to review those papers that discuss that and research. And what I want you to do is think about, are they motivating people by the nature of games, or are they just using the kind of the dressing, the clothes of games and applying it to their problem? So most of what games are about is understanding people. Now, that requires lots of psychology. You can do whole degrees on psychology, naturally. And so we can't really get that far into all the psychology around why people play games, right? Because there's a lot of it. But we will look at some psychology of motivation, right? And so one of the ones we're going to look at is self-determination theory. But if you want to, you can go into, you know, what drives people's behaviors, what are motivations, what leads to fatigue, what are the social motivations for people and how much social interaction they need, what are emotions and can you control them, and how do you stimulate emotional responses in people, how we deal with novelty, like novelty seeking activity, things like the Hawthorne effect and the Milgram experiments. Have you heard of Hawthorne and Milgram? I think I'm hopefully I'm getting this right the right way. So the Milgram experiments are the ones where if you electrify somebody, right? If I wear a white coat and tell you to electrify somebody, you are more like, because someone in authority has told you to do it, you do it, because, you know, even if the other person is screaming and saying, no, it hurts, you go, well, you know, they told me to. And so this abdication of authority is something that humans do. They justify their behaviors. Hawthorne effects are related to being watched. So if somebody watches you do things, you change your behavior. And the mere fact that somebody's watching or someone's paying attention to you will change what you do. And so they were trying to work out what was the ideal lighting in a factory, and every time they changed the lighting either up or down, productivity went up. So apparently there wasn't an ideal amount of light in the factory, it was you pay attention to people and they work harder. So yeah, so there's this challenge of when you go and try and measure like the impact of your game, the fact that you've gone in and measured people will change their entire behavior, right? One of the clearest examples of this was a depression game that some New Zealanders developed, and I know the developers in the university, and a game for depression for teenagers. And they were comparing it to being on a waiting list. And the fact that, you know, somebody's trying to help you, and when you're a depressed teenager, the fact they're trying to help probably makes you feel better. Right? Rather than being saying, we'll put you on a waiting list, it's going to take 6 months before you can see a psychologist, just don't kill yourself for 6 months, and then we'll talk to you. Right? So comparing that, go away and come back in 6 months, where they take this game, every couple of weeks, we'll check in to see how the game's going, to see if it's helping you. Right? Even that change is enough that maybe it's the fact that somebody cares enough to try and help you that makes you feel better. So that's kind of in that placebo, someone paying attention to you affects how you feel. Right, the one that games are often used to do is in behavioural change, right? So suicide, you're having negative thoughts, I'm trying to change your behaviour so you don't have negative thoughts or commit suicide. If it's a health or education game, if it's a health game, I want you to eat healthier, or I want you to quit smoking, or you want to quit smoking, or so you try and take a game that will motivate you, right? Because that's usually why we're engaged in games and putting games into other activities, is we want to motivate something, right? And so if you're trying to do behavioural change, it's whole psychology on behavioural change, and the self-determination theory is the one we're going to look at, and I want you to use, when you look at serious games and the effects they have, I want you to think about self-determination theory. But there are also theories on reasoned action, right? So and self-efficacy. There is the fog model of which you can combine with self-determination theory, but the fog model is that a behaviour doesn't equal food, because you know that's so a behaviour equals motivation, ability, and a trigger. Right? And so for the classic example of this is smoking behavior. Right? So when you smoke, the behavior of taking a smoke is related to your motivation to smoke, your ability to smoke, and there being a trigger that triggers you to recognize that that's something you should do now. So for smokers, often there's a trigger of, you know, oh, it's the end of lecture, or I'm on a coffee break, I have a coffee, I go outside, bang, I get triggered, and that triggers the behavior. Right? Now I'm motivated because I've got a nicotine, I'm missing out on nicotine, and my body's saying, hey, you need more nicotine right now. So that's a motivation, and my ability is, do I have a packet of cigarettes? Right? If I have a packet of cigarettes, and I'm desperate for nicotine, the trigger will fire the behavior. And so when we try and stop you from smoking, we try and remove one of those. Right? So we try and remove the motivation by giving you nicotine patches that tries to take that kind of cognitive motivation out. We tax them heavily to draw your ability to get cigarettes is trying to take away the ability. And triggers is one of the psychological behavioral things we do is don't hang out with the people that you would normally smoke with. When you go to a bar, don't go to a bar and drink, because when you drink, you get triggered to have a cigarette. So you have to change behaviors to try and remove your trigger. Right? So there, the self-determination theory, which is about what motivates us, fits inside this M, right? It fits inside that motivation. So when you're looking at when someone applies a game to a situation, think, what motivations are they affecting? Or are they working on that kind of fog model of behavior, saying, well, okay, we know people are already motivated to do this, like they want to be healthy, so let's assume they're motivated to be healthy. So let's try and work on the fact that their abilities and triggers are wrong. Right? So let's lower the price of fresh food. Let's raise the price of sugary foods. Let's take away the sugar from the checkout counter so that you don't get triggered to buy your kid junk food. So they're not trying to change your motivation, they're trying to change the other bits around. Right? So games can do the same things, right? We can try and affect other parts of behaviors. And, you know, theories of planned behaviors, how people plan and think about what they're going to be, how they tell narrative stories about who they are. These are all theories around how you change people's behaviors. Right? Now, different papers will rely on different psychological foundations. I'm not comfortable saying any one of these is the true one way of doing anything. Right? Humans are complex. We respond in interesting ways, and I think some people work better in some ways than others. Right? They're trying to make self-determination theory tries to be cross-cultural, but you know we're still trying to work out motivation in humans. And so when I say I don't think one size fits everybody. Right? So and for some things, okay, who thinks chocolate is the best flavour? Who thinks strawberry is the best flavour? Right. So obviously we don't have much passion about either. So chocolate is 1 vote, strawberry got 2 votes. Strawberry wins. Okay, so we're all going to have strawberry from now on. It's the only flavour you're allowed, because the universe has voted and we've got one best flavour and it's strawberry. None of you are allowed chocolate or vanilla or any other flavour. This doesn't make sense, right? Different people are motivated by different things, so you have to kind of understand the culture you're working with it. And to understand players, there is this concept of player types. Okay, so player types are the idea that we have different motivations, and this was done in the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, by Bartle, and he doesn't really like that everybody keeps talking about it, because he doesn't believe we should keep talking about it, because he felt it was reasonably accurate for text-based role-playing games, dungeon crawling, and then it works. Everything else, we can't apply this to all games. That doesn't make any sense, right? It only was the small research he did on a small wee section of gamers. But the concept of there being types, and even for you guys as researchers, even this concept of drawing 2 axes, putting one dimension on one axis, another dimension on another axis, and then categorizing people, you'll see that all the time, right? People project massively complex world situations into a nice flat 2D structure because it's easy to draw on paper. Right? Because that's what we do. So you'll see this for political debates, right? You'll have left to right and libertarian authoritarian. Right? And then they'll place you in that grid. Right? And so they try and say this is, you know, acting up here and interacting down here, and this is about the players and this is about the world. So they try and create these axes and you move around within the axes to find your place. Right? Unfortunately, life doesn't project as easily into 2 dimensions as researchers would like it to. So there's a lot of complexity you get lost when you kind of take all of your personalities and try and whack them down into a single 2-dimensional area. But the idea here is that there are killers and socializers. Killers were acting on people, socializers were interacting with people, but they're interested in the people bit. And there are achievers, which are acting on the world, they're trying to achieve something, and explorers are interacting with the world. Right? So there are these 4 kind of personality traits. He then did, okay, I'm a computer scientist, I think there's more complex here, so he created an extra dimension on politics. And so you had griefers and politicians were subcategories of killers, and opportunists and planners were subcategories of achievers. Friends and networkers were so friends were people you are actually building personal relationships, where networkers were trying to achieve something by being social. Right? These were being actually friendly, these were trying to achieve something. Politicians are trying to achieve something, these are just having fun. Right? Griefers are just having fun. Opportunists, they don't really work out what achievements they're going to do, they're just kind of, oh, hey, okay, that's fine. Whereas planners, you know, the strategic, I'm trying to achieve something, I'm going to plan my achievements. And explorers, the scientists who have a methodological approach, to kind of, you know, strategic approach to exploring, versus the hackers who just explore and just do whatever comes across their thing, right? So kind of opportunity versus strategy. And to try and make more player types. And, you know, then you can say, well, okay, these are competitive friends. Are these people just curious about the world? And these are opportunists. So how you label them. And then you go, well, okay, if we're really wondering about things, we could just replace all of those. These are all different player type categories that you can actually map reasonably closely to each other. So the Bartles Killer, Achiever, Explorer, Socializer, we have Elinx, Agon, Mimesis, and Alia. Which were like ancient Greek literature. But Lazaro uses serious fun, hard fun, easy fun, and people fun to categorize why you're doing things. Right? And you might have power, role, task, and people as your motivators. So they try and give them different labels. They each have slightly different overlapping areas, but there are generally some people who fall into each of these categories, and they try and line them up. Right? So you'll find lots of people categorizing their users by doing this kind of, oh, where do you fit? What I'm interested in, and what I want to do when you start looking at how do you categorize people, why people play games, going beyond the mechanics and saying, okay, there are all these player types and there are these mechanics that they play with, is I want to talk about engaging features. And this is a combination of self-determination theory, which is a theory about general motivation, plus a couple of game-specific ones that I've added. So, agency is a self-determination theory one, right? So agency, you guys want to have choice. You want to have agency, you want to be in control of something. Now, we're actually going, and the current model that is being used is a basically a stock and flow model, or a container model of agency and competence and relations. So the agent, the kind of container volume approach is saying that you guys all have, imagine you've got 3 cups, right? One of those is the agency cup, and there's a certain amount of outflow from that and inflow. If you don't have enough agency, you don't have enough power in your life, that actually upsets you and you get what's called need frustration. right? And so you start acting out and trying to take power because you're powerless. If you have too much agency, you start doing the, when I have a break, I just want to watch shit television, right? Because I'm making choices all the time. I'm tired of having to look after everybody and make all these choices. I just want to have kind of a no brain, take me away, just do something really relaxing and not have to make choices, right? So rather than saying this is a unidirectional, we all want more of it, it's saying we have a balance that we're trying to achieve, and we're trying to get between kind of an upper threshold of too much agency and too much responsibility, and lower threshold of not enough. Okay. Competence. So when you do something difficult, you get rewarded for it. Right? So this is something that where we think as games are quite good at. And again, getting positive feedback, being able to be good at something, right? You can actually, if you're never good at anything, right, that's also a psychological disorder. And one of the things you find about depression, I don't know if any of you have depression, but one interesting test is, can you remember specific happy events? Because depressed people find it very difficult to remember specific happy events. They can describe what a happy event would be like, right, because they're intelligent, but they can't remember having enjoyed a specific memory of a happy event, right? And so part of the depression, actually, it makes it harder to access those memories because you're not in the psychological state to get access to them, right? Whereas they can very clearly remember specific bad events, right? So they can't remember being good at something. And the other end, if you're constantly being measured and constantly being rewarded for everything you do, that nothing you do is just because you enjoy it, everything is motivated by something that's making you achieve, that can also lead to problems, right? You say, just stop measuring me. I just, I just want to eat my tea. I don't want to be scored on how fast I eat my food. Okay? There's an overload if you constantly are competing all the time. This is a non-self-determination theory, but it fits. What I think is one of the motivators in games is often a creativity drive, right? A crafting drive. So when you look at Minecraft, right? It's not about necessarily agency, right? Yes, you can, it's a sandbox, so you can do what you like, but you're not doing it because, yay, finally I have control over blocks. But there is certainly a creativity. I want to make things in the world, right? So there is a creativity in kind of crafting and making things motivator. There's an experimentation motivator in games, right? We want to try new things, right? So I want to make new things and I want to try new things. These are kind of game-specific ones that are potentially less cross-cultural than the standard self-determination theory. And the final one, before we take a break, social interaction. Relatedness is what you'll find in self-determination theory. So self-determination theory, and you'll find this, I was reading a recent article, which I'll share with you guys, on why students are bad students. Right? Why you guys are bad students. And it's our fault as lecturers, apparently. Because we don't understand self-determination theory. And so in the self-determination theory, relatedness, right, the connection to other people and things that matter to you in your social environment, is another aspect of motivations, right? So high score lists trigger social interactions, right? If the high score list, no one else gets to see it, then it's not as motivating, right, is the idea for around this socializing. Now, introverts have quite a low level of, like, in their container of where do you put an introvert, you probably put them near the bottom. Right? I'm an extrovert, so I'm near the top. I like lots of social interaction, and I actually gain energy by social interactions. So it's very hard to push me over the top and give me too many people or too much time spent with people. Whereas I know my wife and a whole bunch of introverts I know, if they spend a full day having to talk to people all the time, they just need some quiet time, right? It's, they're done, right? They're just, no, I don't want to see anybody. Just close the doors, shut the windows, quiet me time. And that's because you've been overloaded with social interaction. Right? It's not that you never want it, because if you don't have any, you again, once you get to the bottom of your container, you still need some social interaction. But where you sit as your kind of default natural level varies. Do you guys know the term hysteresis? Hysteresis, okay. So hysteresis is another word for this. So if you've all experienced hysteresis, I'm certain, because on thermostats, hysteresis is where you have a lower threshold and a higher threshold. When the lower threshold is triggered, something turns on, and it keeps going up until it hits the higher threshold, and then it turns off. Right? That is hysteresis. That's the name for that system, because it has a lower bound where something turns on and a higher bound where it turns off, and so the actual temperature goes up and down between the two limits. Right? Because when it hits the bottom, you heat the room up until it gets hot enough, and then you turn the heater off, and then the temperature slowly cools down again, and you hit the bottom limit. It's so that you don't sit there flicking the heater on and on and on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off, right? If you have a single threshold, you get this flickering behavior. Whereas if you have hysteresis, you go down and up and down and up, right? And so most of you have those for agency, competence, and relatedness, right? At some point, you feel like you'll fight for more control because you feel like you've lost control. And then you can be in control for quite a long time until you get too much. And then eventually you advocate and say, no, I don't want, just don't make me make choices anymore. I've been making too many choices. And then you kind of give it away for a while, and that's okay, have none for a while, then go, oh, wait, no, I need more now again, right? So you go up and down between limits, right? So we'll have a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, and we'll talk about some of the problems of gamification that I want you to think about when you read the papers that we'll cover. Okay, so have a 10-minute break. Think about what is your natural agency, competence, and relatedness levels. Actually, I feel like drawing it on the whiteboard. And seeing if we can place ourselves in that. But I'll pause the stream.